They called us tunnel rats. What they didn't see was how the tunnels followed us long after we crawled out. Kuchi area, June 1968. I was still new enough to the war to believe maps mattered. Grid lines, cleared zones, arrows showing control. On paper, our company owned the ground. We had over 100 men, machine guns dug in, mortars set, artillery on call within minutes. From above, it looked solid. Then we found the tunnel. It wasn't dramatic. No hidden trapdoor, just a narrow hole in the dirt, partly concealed by leaves and rot, barely wider than a man's shoulders. Red earth packed so hard it looked almost polished. Roots hung from the opening like veins. The captain stared at it for a long moment and said what everyone was thinking without wanting to say it. There's a world under us. Tunnels ruined the logic of everything we were trained to do. Firepower meant nothing when the enemy moved beneath your boots. You couldn't flank them. You couldn't suppress them. You couldn't even be sure they were gone after you swept an area twice. So we did what the doctrine said. We sent men down. No one volunteered. That's a myth people like to tell later. The truth is, we chose. Smaller guys. Calm ones, the kind who didn't talk much and didn't ask questions. Courage wasn't the requirement. Compliance was. The tunnel wasn't a room. It wasn't even a passage. It was the earth pressed tight around a human body. You crawled on elbows and knees, sometimes on your stomach, sometimes sideways. The ceiling scraped your helmet. The walls breathed dust into your mouth every time you moved. Inside, sound disappeared. Your own breathing felt too loud. A flashlight beam died after a few feet, swallowed by turns you couldn't see around. You couldn't turn back easily. You couldn't stand. You couldn't run. The first man down that day was 19. He carried a pistol, one grenade, and a rope tied around his waist. Radios were useless underground. The rope was the only language we had. One pull, stop. Two pulls, pull me out. Minutes passed, then more. We watched the rope like it might start moving on its own. When he came back out, his face was the wrong color. Not fear exactly, something flatter. He didn't describe what he saw. He just handed the pistol to the next man and walked away from the hole, shaking his hands as if they didn't belong to him anymore. That became the pattern. From a command perspective, the tunnels had to be cleared. Leaving them meant ambushes from nowhere, night attacks from beneath our positions, weapons appearing where there had been nothing an hour before. Tactically, it made sense. Psychologically, it was a slow bleed. After days of tunnel work, men stopped sleeping deeply. They startled at footsteps. They hated sitting on the ground. Some kept checking the earth beneath them, pressing their boots down as if expecting it to give way. We didn't have a name for it then. PTSD wasn't a word anyone used. These men were still doing their jobs, still taking orders, still fighting, but something had cracked. We eventually collapsed that tunnel system with demolition charges. The report said neutralized. Another success, another cleared sector. That night, lying in the dark with the jungle breathing around us, I realized the mistake in that word. You can destroy a tunnel. You can't destroy what it teaches a man about the ground beneath him. And once you learn that the earth itself can be an enemy, you never really feel safe standing on it again. After Kuchi, the war stopped feeling like something in front of us. It was everywhere. We moved north a few weeks later, different province, different unit, attached, same problem. Every base we occupied felt temporary, like we were guests who had overstayed. Engineers cleared obvious tunnel entrances, infantry swept the perimeter, sensors went into the ground. On paper, it was controlled. At night, it never felt that way. The smallest sounds became threats. A shift in dirt, a hollow echo when you stepped wrong. Men started sleeping with their helmets on, chin straps tight, as if that thin steel could protect them from the ground opening beneath their heads. I noticed it first in myself when I stopped lying flat. I slept curled on my side, knees tucked up, boots dug into the dirt. Part of my mind stayed awake, listening for a sound I couldn't describe but somehow knew I'd recognize when it came. Command kept asking for tunnel rats. Every operation needed them. Every suspected complex, every village near a tree line or creek bed. The same names kept coming up, not because they were fearless, but because they hadn't broken yet. Inside the tunnels, the rules were always the same. Move slow, check for tripwires with your hands, not your eyes. Listen for breathing that isn't yours. If you see light, it might be a lamp or it might be bait. The worst part wasn't contact. It was the waiting. Sometimes a tunnel went on forever, splitting into branches so tight you had to choose blindly. Left or right, you couldn't mark your path. You couldn't be sure you were moving forward instead of deeper into a trap. I remember one crawl where the tunnel dipped suddenly, water filling it knee-high. The air went thick and wet. My chest pressed against the dirt so hard I couldn't expand my lungs properly. I had to take short, shallow breaths, counting them to keep from panicking. That's when the thought came. If this collapses, no one will know where I am. No dramatic explosion, no firefight, just wait. Earth, silence. When I came back out, daylight felt wrong, too open, too exposed. I wanted to get low, wanted walls close to my shoulders again. That scared me more than anything I'd felt underground. Others showed it differently. One guy started laughing after every tunnel run, high and sharp, like he couldn't stop himself. Another refused to go down again and was quietly reassigned before anyone could write it up. A few drank harder, a few talked less. One put his pistol in his mouth during a mortar attack and had to be tackled before he pulled the trigger. Um, Still, we kept going, because the tunnels kept working. They moved supplies unseen. They let the enemy appear inside our wire. They turned our firepower into noise without certainty. We could kill men we saw, we could bomb coordinates, but we couldn't intimidate what we couldn't reach. Months later, after my rotation ended, I went home with a duffel bag and a body that still reacted before my mind did. I avoided basements. I hated subways. I flinched when the floor creaked at night. People asked what Vietnam was like. I told them about heat, about jungle, about ambushes. I never told them about the ground. Because how do you explain that the war didn't end when you left it? That part of it stayed underground, waiting, and every quiet moment after felt like listening for something that might still be crawling towards you. Years later, I learned the word for it: PTSD. At the time, we just called it not right. It showed up in small, embarrassing ways. I'd freeze when a room felt too tight. Elevators made my skin crawl. I always chose aisle seats, always needed a clear path out. If someone stood too close behind me, my shoulders locked and my pulse spiked before I could stop it. At night, the dreams came back underground. Not explosions, not firefights. Pressure. In the dreams, the tunnel was always narrower than before. My rifle caught on the wall. My helmet scraped the ceiling. I'd try to turn my head and couldn't. I'd open my mouth to shout, but dirt filled it instead. I woke up gasping, hands clawing at the sheets like they were packed earth. I didn't tell anyone. Back then, you were home. You were supposed to be fine. But I recognized it in other men when I saw them. At the VA waiting room. At reunions where laughter came too fast and died too quickly. Tunnel rats had a look. Eyes that scanned rooms automatically, backs that never fully relaxed, voices that dropped when a space felt closed. We talked around it, never directly. Someone would mention Ku Chi or Ben Cat, or that one complex that just kept going. Heads would nod, jokes would surface, dark and sharp-edged. Then the subject would change. What haunted us wasn't just fear, it was the helplessness. Above ground, you could fight back. You could maneuver, call for support, bring firepower. Below ground, none of that mattered. Rank didn't matter. Strength didn't matter. Technology barely mattered. It was just you, the dirt, and whoever knew that space better than you ever could. That does something to a man. It teaches you that control is an illusion. Even now, decades later, I sometimes catch myself listening to floors the way I used to listen to tunnel walls, waiting for a sound that doesn't belong, waiting for the ground to betray me. People like to talk about the Vietnam War in terms of politics, numbers, victories, failures. For me, it will always be simpler than that. We fought the jungle, we fought the enemy, and some of us fought the earth itself, and never fully came back out. I'm an old man now. My hands shake sometimes, not from fear, just age, the doctors say. My hearing's gone soft in one ear. My knees ache when the weather changes. On the outside, I look like every other veteran you pass in a grocery store aisle. But there are moments when the tunnel comes back without warning. A child crawling under a table to grab a toy, a power outage in a narrow hallway, the smell of damp soil after heavy rain. My chest tightens before my mind catches up. People ask what it was like to be a tunnel rat. They expect stories about bravery, about medals, about kills. Sometimes they want something cinematic. Heroic men crawling into darkness like it was a challenge we welcomed. It wasn't. We went down because someone had to, because artillery couldn't reach what was underground, because airstrikes couldn't see it, because the war didn't end at the surface. Every time I went into a tunnel, I understood, clearly, calmly, that there was a real chance I would not come back out. No dramatic last stand, no body recovered, just another man swallowed by the ground. That knowledge stays with you. It changes how you see safety, how you see space, how you see silence. When the war ended, the tunnels stayed. They collapsed, filled in, vanished under farms and roads. Children play on that land now. Houses sit where chambers once branched for miles. Life moved on. Some of us never quite did. PTSD isn't always screaming or rage or nightmares every night. Sometimes it's quieter. It's the way you sit with your back to the wall, the way you measure doorways, the way darkness still feels heavy instead of empty. I don't regret serving. I don't regret the men beside me. But I know this much now. The tunnels didn't just wound bodies, they rewired minds. We entered them as soldiers. Some of us came out alive, but part of us is still down there, listening to the dirt, waiting for a sound that means it's time to move. I've tried to explain that to people who never went there. How do you describe a fear that doesn't fade, only learns to hide? How do you explain that the war followed you home, not in memories of gunfire, but in the shape of rooms, the weight of air, the distance between walls? For a long time, I blamed myself. I told myself I should have been tougher, that other men had it worse, that if I didn't talk about it, it would eventually loosen its grip. That's what we were taught. Carry it, don't name it, don't let it slow you down. But silence doesn't bury things, it just builds another tunnel. It wasn't until years later, sitting across from another tunnel rat in a quiet room, that I finally heard someone say it out loud. I still feel like I'm underground. That was it. That single sentence. Not fear, not weakness, recognition. We didn't talk about combat. We talked about breathing, about how the chest tightens in small spaces, about how our bodies react before our minds can intervene, about how we learn to live above ground again, inch by inch. Some never did. I think about the men who volunteered more often than the rest, the ones who joked on the surface and went silent below, the ones who came up covered in dirt, eyes wide, hands steady, but never quite the same afterward. No medals ever captured what that took. No after-action report measured the cost of crawling alone into a space designed to kill you quietly. History remembers battles, statistics remember casualties, but it forgets what it means to fight a war where the enemy is invisible, the ground is alive, and survival depends on staying calm while every instinct tells you to run. If there's one thing I want people to understand, it's this. Tunnel rats weren't fearless. We were afraid, and we went anyway. And sometimes the bravest part wasn't going in. It was learning how to come back out and live with what stayed behind.